Denise Matteau here for Visions of Mercy, um, a channel looking at the spiritual realm and metaphysical dimensions of life. And I do it with an eye to actual physical explanation. I recommend, uh, right now, I'm recommending Anthony Patch. He's the main one. I've been looking also at some other channels that I'll start getting into, but he's a great explainer. Okay. Anyway, one of the things that he has been talking about is something called granular density. Now, this is in relation to building up a picture that the more density you have in it, the more realistic it is, to the point where you can mistake it for the real thing. I learned about this years and years and years ago, before computers, um, or at least before they were in the popular world, from art. One of the earliest things actually was in grade school, learning to appreciate art. We were looking at paintings by Rembrandt. And one of the things the nuns pointed out was that he used only a few strokes, that if you went right up close to the painting and looked closely, they didn't look like a person at all. They were a few abstract strokes of tan and light brown and maybe even, lighter shades and maybe a little blue here and there. And only when you stood back at a distance did you see a face. And they used that to explain to us that our mind places the meaning into the image. And I also learned it in a more practical way, taking art lessons, um, learning how to make sketches, which one of the favorite ones was mass drawing, where you take the side of the charcoal and you just rub it on the paper. And if you're looking at a still life, some fruit in a bowl, for example, you're going to press down harder while you're looking at the shadowy part and lighter when you're not. And then you'll see this fuzzy image that, because you know what you intended, you're going to see that bowl of fruit in it. And if you have been accurate in placing those shadows, a total stranger seeing it in another room without looking at it is going to see the same bowl of fruit because of the granular density. And what those of us who do realistic art used to do is, after you get that almost abstract approximation, you go in and you fill in more and more detail. But you have the right proportions because of the loose granular level. You get the realistic part from putting more detail, not just the roundish shape of the apple, but the actual dimple on the side, the actual curve of the stem, the actual mottled skin. And then you go into the density of adding color. Trompe-l'oeil, to fool the eye, is a form of painting that was popular in the 1800s, when people were really, I think, beginning to mediate their reality. They were putting so much granular density into a life-size painting, which was another part of the database. How big is it? Is it equal to the actual object? So they would do things like paint a 6-foot tall canvas with a picture of somebody coming through a doorway. And then if you hung that on the wall, and people coming in your front door of your house seeing it would often even say hi, because they would see somebody coming through what looked like another room. And it was a bit of a joke to have a painting like that. and fool people. Um, Now, what's interesting about this is that when these super realistic paintings were being done, it was partly because artists were celebrating the Age of Enlightenment, followed the Renaissance, and the study of perspective. Okay? The study of perspective enabled them to use a greater database, more granular density to create these realistic paintings. Um, Leonardo da Vinci, not only was he a master of perspective, but he also, I think, was credited with developing a lot of the actual color formulas for actual uh, oil paints that we still use today. And those colors are part and parcel of extremely realistic skin tones and other realistic colorings. And that granular data was creating very realistic art. Now, what's interesting, if you consider, for example, ancient Egyptian art, going back to those lovely nuns who were teaching us about art, and most of them, they would read an article about art the night before they were to give that lesson. God bless them. They were very sweet teachers. They weren't artists, but they conveyed what they could find to us. Anyway, primitive art, they say, oh, well, the ancient Egyptians did these sideways looking, look like an Egyptian profiles and so on, and semi abstract creatures, many of which are very realistic, and we can see today are actually realistic drawings, but they're done in a style so that you didn't mistake it for the actual creature. You just understood what it was referring to. Now, in those days, a lot of the paintings are of mythological creatures, gods with animal heads, a bird-headed god or the jackal-headed god, human beings with animal heads, um, mammals with wings, various kinds of chimera. And that, of course, persisted through modern times. But in ancient times, these stylized drawings were the only ones because the artist was working with a database where he was trying to depict the interior mind and the non-physical realm to the physical. He didn't feel like he had to depict the physical world to his community because they were in it and they could all see it. But he could depict, particularly I'm thinking specifically of the temple art more than cave art, but the temple art was related to depicting theological and mythological and possibly even scientific concepts. I mean, we're beginning to understand today that some of what they had in ancient Egypt may have included electricity, because we actually are understanding that we're looking at modern appliances, electric light bulbs, actually, in their drawings, which somebody in the 1800s couldn't recognize. But most of what they were painting in the temples, they were working on a database of bringing what was somewhere else into the physical realm. Artists in the Age of Enlightenment had turned their back on the spiritual realm. They were even beginning to toy with the idea of God as non-existent, although the closest the closest most people got in the 17 and 1800s was to say, well, God was, he set the universe up and then he left, and we're on our own. And of the intellectuals, of course, did continue forward into full atheism, but it was a materialistic form of atheism, very much involved with the idea that the three-dimensional world, what we can touch and see, is what is there. And so then art began to want to bring this realistic side, this physical world, to the eye and say, here, this is real. And then the granular density started to be played with to the point where you had these super realistic paintings. Okay, let's get out of the 1800s and come up to modern time. The first computer games were like Pac-Man, a little circle eating little dots, or like Pong, the two little lines ping-ponging a dot, and no granular density there at all. Then we got to Mario and Super Mario, where we had cartoon characters, and now we're at the level not only that you can look at a screen and not know for sure if you're looking at an artist's rendition of a scene or a filmmaker's recording of a scene. Okay, we can be fooled, and Photoshop pranksters like to do that all the time, but they've gone beyond that. You can now put on a headset, put on gloves that will give your hands the sensations, and even, I think they even have almost like full body suits, electrodes that you could put on and have such an intense total surround virtual experience that you could play out a story of flying through space or being in Jurassic Park, like the Terminator movie. I think it was the Terminator. The guy, when Arnold Schwarzenegger went to Mars on a dream vacation, he actually was taking a virtual reality vacation. I forget the title of the movie, but I saw it a couple of times. Anyway, it's the granular density of the human beings playing around with the spiritual and the physical has gotten to the point where there is so much granular density in the computers, in the quantum artificial intelligence network that is bigger than any single computer. Just as a human being is, I'm more than a pile of skin and bones and fat sitting here making noise. The noise I make makes sense because I'm using a language we share. And our connection turns this into a coherent experience. Granular density is no longer something that we are gathering together in order to look at it and to show to each other and to fool each other. The computers themselves are creating granular density. At this point, these giant computer companies like Google and Facebook and some of these others, Facebook in particular, it's a scary, scary place. I'm spending less and less time there. They have been gathering far more data than human beings intended. And the granular density is creating another level of reality that is no longer our playground. It's no longer under our control. I'm coming up to the limit on my video here. It's a new channel. I'm only at 15 minutes videos. So I'm going to try to continue this in my next one. Please give a like, or don't like if you prefer, and subscribe and share, and put a link to your own in the bottom. Goodbye. Denise Matto over and out. Bye.